And I did. We did. It was lovely. Rustic, surely, but lovely nonetheless. The staff had been quartered relatively near the chalet, and there was some trepidation regarding the lack of security measures, but I yearned to be away from the suffocating environment of the palace. I knew that there was a great deal of business that needed handling. The papers circulating news of my return would only placate the people so much, but that could wait for a period while I recuperated from my efforts below. Thankfully, it was spacious, per the requirements of donors' baggage. The proprietor, a one Hans Wiedemeyer, if I recall correctly, had taken the liberty of supplying all the appropriate necessaries, being stuffed up with the needs of everyday life taken care of for you, as was the case in Berlin, placed a burning desire in the mind to be liberated from the gilded cage and to do things myself. Donia was less enthused by that inevitability than with the horticultural features of our surroundings. Her summer clothing was certainly something that enthused me. She wouldn't be caught dead chopping wood or doing anything else that required a measure of manual labor, but she enjoyed her frolics through the forest with her little notebook, drawing the foliage and writing down little notes regarding coloration. I'm sure that, after this trip, a long list of requests would be placed before our poor gardener. Our carriage came to a stop, and the driver was good enough to unload our luggage in the front room of the chalet. He wasn't an aged fellow, but after 15 trips to the carriage up the hill, and 15 trips back, I felt sufficient sympathy to tip him generously. He would return, eventually. The staff followed behind in a Daimler motor carriage that I had requested, should we ever need to sojourn into town for anything. Mostly a precaution, should a telegram arrive from someone worth interrupting our vacation and require a prompt response.
It is lovely here, my dear. It was just as you described it.
Indeed. I'll have the staff start a breakfast of some description. Does Her Majesty carry a preference? She whispered something unrepeatable into my ear and smiled. I smiled too, but what she asked for would require the entirety of the staff in the chalet to vacate the premises. I should at least afford them the time to get situated before our physical desires got the best of us. I settled for what was available, only 3 courses, as one of the chefs had departed into town to retrieve some of the ingredients that we favored, but were unknown to the proprietor of the chalet. I found Donia leaning over the railing on the back balcony which overlooked the nearby Waldsee, the shining sun glimmering over the waters. I wrapped my arms around her waist and drew her in close. You know, in the worlds below, there are fish that take flight into the air, straight from the surf. Her giggles did little to conceal her skepticism.
I'm no child, Wilhelm. Surely you jest.
I would never jest with you, Schatz. Eventually the chef returned, and breakfast was served. Nothing extraordinary, but after a lengthy journey by rail, any proper sustenance filled the heart and the stomach. I gave cause for the staff to vacate the premises, largely by handing them several hundred marks, and demanding that they source some proper beverages from the distilleries in the next town over. Not a problem, sir. Right away, sir. We took the meal on the veranda. With my newly restored strength in my arm, I carried our own plates to the table. We continued our verbal reconnection over the coffee. Have the ladies of the court fared well? I know a great number of their husbands volunteered for the journey below.
They've yet to change. To grow up, I should say. Still having salacious affairs with young officers. Still backbiting the ones that aren't present. Still taking up a cigarette habit for the more controversial ones. I'm starting to lose patience when spending time with them.
A sentiment I understand entirely, my love.
Did you begin grating on your subordinates during your journey?
Moltke can be abrasive, but I know him to be a dependable man. Tirpitz struggles with his love of the drink. I fear his consultations with his clairvoyant are worsening the issue.
You and his wife both are of one mind, then?
Diesel, Kirchbach, and the rest of them were all good fellows. They endured me, and I endured them. That is what is required within the earth, endurance.
As you say, dearest.
I will freely admit, we ploughed into breakfast. Whatever the chef was putting into the mountain of Weisswurst, bacon, eggs, rye with preserves, and watermelon certainly endeared the both of us to him. It was always a curious thing to see Donia's table habits change from when she and I were alone, and when she was amongst the company of her friends or other members of the family. One could see a ravenousness in her eyes that she only felt comfortable enough to indulge when she was with me. That vacation was well needed. For the first 3 weeks, nothing of note happened. We indulged in the culinary and physical desires that I had been unable to express during my absences, planned and unplanned. The scenery around us, as summer began to move towards autumn, changed very little. No telegrams, no interruptions, just bliss. And then, on the Monday of the final week, the staff gave a knock at our door after dinner. What fresh hell is this?
Calm, my love. I'm sure it's just the staff delivering the week's sustenance.
Or prophylactics. She blushed and rose and returned from the dining table to the parlor as I opened the door. A small fellow greeted me, a bit mismatched. It was late, and he may have been interrupted during the course of his changing clothes, given that his grey uniform tunic was paired to a pair of grey leisure trousers.
Your Majesty, good evening.
How can I help you, Mr.
Zvol, Your Majesty.
Dutch? Frisian, perhaps? No matter. I ask again, how can I help you?
Well, sir, I would first ask that you invite me in, and that you would take a seat.
Donna called from the parlor, wondering what terrible tragedy was depriving her of my company for such a length of time.
My love, return to me.
I turned back to the interruption. If you have a telegram, I'm happy to read it on my own time, and if there is nothing else...
Sir...
He looked a thunder at me, not anger, fear. He was young, and his voice and stature betrayed him. Very well, take a seat in the hall, and I shall be with you momentarily. I assured Donna that all was well, and that there seemed to be some pressing business invading our quiet retreat. She understood, and I went out in a bit of a huff to deal with whatever issue had presented itself. Perhaps Moltke needed some advice regarding how to handle an extramarital affair. Perhaps Tirpitz had been put in the stocks for his drunkenness. Perhaps Diesel had been trod over by one of his engines. The morbid humor of the pondered options gave me a smile. I sat, and this Zwol sat across the table from me. I have pressing matters to attend to, and you've interrupted my retreat with the Crown Princess. I hope that whatever it is that you have, it is intimate and serious.
I assure you that it is, Your Majesty.
He produced a letter from his breast pocket. He said those terrible words. He struggled with speaking them, and I would soon struggle with reading them.
Your Majesty and the Crown Princess have my sincerest condolences.
No. Had I been of my right mind, I would have retrieved my letter opener. In the rush brought on by such words, I simply rammed my thumb into the opening in the envelope and ripped it open. Within was the note, doctor's handwriting, given the hieroglyphics and indecipherability. Towards the bottom, scrawled more slowly, perhaps as it was readable, were the following words.
It is our collective sorrow and highest obligation to duty as the Crown's physicians, that we report the passing of His Most Royal Highness, Kaiser Wilhelm I, following a prolonged cardiac arrest as a result of his observing the similar, untimely passing of his favoured son, His Most Regal Prince Frederick III. The Prince's condition made it impossible for him to breathe, and the administrations of morphium were increased at his request to levels beyond likely survivability. He asked that we relay this note, his last, to His Majesty, such that it may be a comfort to him. Similarly attached is a note from His Majesty's grandfather, our Emperor. God rest their souls and commend them to heaven. Their leadership and heroism will be sorely missed. May God bless the reign of His Majesty, Kaiser Wilhelm II.
My shaking hand laid the note back onto the table. I started to break down. Why did it have to happen while I was away? A soft hand found its way to my shoulder.
My love, is something...
I choked out my statement around my grief and snapped at her. I didn't turn to face her as the tears began to flow and my throat began to close. Back to the parlor, Donya. I will be with you momentarily." She almost ran. It wasn't my intention to scare her. I just did not want her to see me weep. I laid my face in my hands and let the tears come. I fought so hard to return to my people so that I might be near when their time came. I did my best to make sure that I would be here, and instead, God called them to his gates while I was out indulging in my appetites and luxuring myself in a forested chalet. All I wanted to do was curl into a ball and join them in death. I didn't need this, atop the mountain of madness that I had climbed thus far. God should have taken me down below. He should have taken father and grandfather one at a time for the family to be allowed time to process the tragedy. Why did it have to be both of them? I sat there for what felt like days. On occasion, through the wet stream of tears, I could make out the face of the Reaper's letter-bearer sat across from me. It seemed he was paralyzed. Perhaps he had never seen a man break in this fashion. Perhaps he was unsure of what to say or do when in the presence of his grieving sovereign. Eventually, he produced from his mismatched tunic and kerchief and slid it across the table to me timidly. I took hold of it and covered my face with it. Bringing it away revealed the dousing of tears that now flooded the cloth. I caught a monogram sewn in black thread in the corner. I drew it away from my face as the tears began to slow, and I loudly blew my nose into the cloth before throwing it towards the water basin in the corner of the dining room. If needs must, this fellow can purchase himself a new one. We sat there in silence for but a moment. I could not bring myself to speak. I could hear Donya sharing my grief, having surmised what surely must have happened. Then, yet, even more cruel events began. Another knock at the door. I rose, striding towards it with purpose. Perhaps I'll have the next man I see hanged. Mark II, undeserved deaths with a third. Before me, the town's telegraphist. The Acadian's words poured from my mouth without thinking them in my mind. Who then comes before this house of sorrow? He said something to the effect of, "My name is Tomasz Wolisizikski," largely unintelligible. His German was accented. My temper took hold of me. My dignity broke, and I took hold of his collar, just like that photographer in Paris. Both hands this time. Like the Hockmeister at Grunwald, I am beset by a flood of shit-eating Polacks. You people are a fucking plague on good Prussian dignities. I didn't mean it maliciously, just a joke I used to repeat with fellows of Polish bearing. That fellow Zwoll didn't seem to catch my meaning. This new pest at the door cracked a smile. He must be sufficiently self-aware or historically knowledgeable to understand the wit of my statement. Oh, what a pleasure it is to be comprehended. I released him, and he promptly adjusted the level of his collar. He took my insults in stride. Good for him.
Something from the Chancellor's office, sir. Marked as urgent.
Read on then. What more tragedy could be laid on my door?
As His Imperial Majesty desires. Will His Highness appear in Berlin? Stop. If so, please send reply promptly. Stop. If not, please advise as to position. Stop. Send.
It has already begun. I wanted it to slow down, not speed up. I wasn't ready. I needed time to prepare. I thought I had time. I wasn't ready. I needed to grieve. The family needed to grieve. I needed to speak to grandmother. I needed to speak to mother. I had no desire to rule. Not yet. Not yet. Not yet. Enough. Enough of this madness. Enough of the doubt and the fear and the delusion. I asked the telegraphist to give my reply. His Highness to arrive day after next. Stop. Proceed with plans for coronation. Stop. Dearest Chancellor, I have won my spurs. Stop. Let the next chapter begin. We caught the last train leaving Wiesbaden that evening, straight back to Berlin. No stops, no other passengers. Those that had booked tickets would be refunded. Donya and I did not oversee the staff packing our things and loading the bags. She proceeded to the cabin with an uncharacteristic speed. I went straight to the barman in the dining car and demanded the largest bottle of brandy he had. I walked away without paying. Royal privilege, an emperor's privilege. Why should I not begin to exercise it now? I returned to our cabin and sat down, now afforded time to pass through. the pair of notes that had been sent with that damnable telegram. Donia approached and embraced me tighter than I had thought possible. Perhaps her grief imbued in her an unearthly strength. Not unlike that matriarch of the huntresses I had encountered, I found my strength insufficient to pry her away, but I didn't want to. She leaned into me and asked me a question.
Would you like to be alone, William?
Had I given the impression that I would prefer solitude? No, I don't want to be alone. I don't want to face this most terrible transitory period in my life by myself. I don't know if I ever wish to be alone again. I returned her embrace, and bringing my head off of her shoulder, caught another set of tears and a nascent smile from her. It was time to confront those notes that I could not bring myself to read in our chalet. Donna asked that she be allowed to read them first, perhaps to aid in the interpretation of the sentiments. I knew myself to be an educated man. I knew myself to be ready to read them. What more can God do to curse me, taking my father and grandfather in one fell strike? I raised the bottle to my lips. No snifter, no glass. Time to drown the grief. Let it suffocate in that sharp, fruit-flavored flood. The top third of the bottle was now gone. There's the warmth, taking over almost instantaneously. Donia lay on the chaise, contemplating her own feelings. She knew that I ought to be the first to read their final sentiments. I took another dash through the apple orchard and set the bottle down. Feeling something of a comfort, I began to read aloud the notes before I began to slur my words. One more cigarette. I drew in the flame and brought it away from my lips as I spoke. Father first.
Beloved son, if this note has passed into your possession, know that the rest of the family will be sharing your grief. I believe, as your mother believes, that you are aware that my condition would set me before St. Peter's Gate sooner than mercy would dictate. Know that I have done my best to prepare you for the rigors that you will soon endure, as it has become blatantly clear that your grandfather will likely follow me to heaven. If this is not the case, I would wish for you to consult with him to the best of your ability. I know that you are as best prepared as you can be for your new role, but a wise man shaves experience from the longer beards of men his senior. Understand that this is the way of the world. I know that you will have mixed feelings regarding the assumption of supreme power. I had the same feelings, despite never being compelled to act upon them. My desire to implement a lighter touch from our throne was never realized. My father, your grandfather, insisted that his true position be that of a true emperor with a closed fist, rather than a guiding hand. It is my hope for your rule that you are capable of assuming both roles. I recall that evening, when the physicians informed me of my condition and its terminal nature. You were still at the academy, and we did not communicate to you the news in writing. When you returned from the first maneuvers, our informing you of my condition seemed to impact you greatly. You are governed by your reason and emotion in equal measure. Having raised you to the best of my ability, your mother will mirror my sentiment. It will be critical for you to decide which approach to take when confronted with matters that require a sovereign's judgment. Your military education will provide you with sufficient knowledge in matters martial, and you have the general staff at your disposal, who will do their best to ensure that your visions become a reality on the battlefield. You have our Chancellor, whose guidance should be treated with equal parts deference and skepticism. If it was not already obvious, his contributions were instrumental, but he has his own designs behind his eyes. Be careful with him. Your grandfather's advisors and cabinet should be thoroughly sufficient for all other matters. The wisest rulers know what they know, and they know of what they are ignorant. Seek advice when you need it, and act promptly when you do not. Your mother and your sisters will require some measure of comforting. Do your best. They will look to you now to be the linchpin of the family. Your mother's conflict with Donna must end when you take the crown. From the lowest worker to the highest magister, the tightness of family connections will be a critical factor in determining the course of life. Know that I was relieved at your return from the worlds below. I was more relieved that you returned before grandfather went to God. I know that you are a good man. I know that you will be a good ruler. Ensure that you act in that fashion. Your mother and I love you with the whole of our hearts. We will continue to observe your actions long after she and I have passed. I know that you are worthy of this burden, my son, despite what you may feel now. Our people need you to act worthy of it. Your loving father and His Royal Highness, Crown Prince Friedrich III of Prussia.
I started to weep. Now, it was grandfather's turn.
My dearest grandsire, the time has come. By now you are considering what dreadful curse must be laid upon your head. While you may feel that the passing of sovereign obligation has transpired sooner than you should wish, know that it is God's choice to crown a king, and none other. It is His will that you now take my place, in all likelihood. If I go to God before your father, the crown will not be long on his head before it takes that next journey to rest upon your own. When I approved your sojourn to the worlds below, I hoped that it would make you into a proper man from the difficulty-stricken boy that had so often lingered near the fringes of power. I knew you desired it, but I feared that, should you not be tempered in the fires of war as your father was, that you would be utterly unprepared for the weight of imperial power. When we were apprised of your disappearance, my demands on the military and levers of power almost snapped them off from the great machinery of our nation. I would not lose you. You for whom we had done so much to ready you to rule. When that first dreadful year passed, I was stricken with a fear that I would never see you again. Then you returned, triumphant over the dangers that we had thought were responsible for taking you from us. There is no tragedy worse than losing a child, and no greater relief than finding him again. Your father and I felt that tragedy, and then that relief, in sequence. You returned to us as a man, and a man restored. However you may have managed to be blessed by such a miracle, know that even if you had returned to us in the same condition that you had departed, it would not have prevented us from seeing the change that has clearly overtaken you. That change has made you ready. Your exercise of authority over the assets that we provided for that effort beneath the earth gave you the chance to learn how to command, just as your childhood and tenure at the academy gave you a chance to learn how to obey. I know that you will do your duty well. You are prepared. However woeful you may feel at this moment, that will pass, eventually. Take up that crown, and further the great work that our ancestors began. Do not let the machinations of lesser men prevent you realizing that goal. Do not let your father's tendency towards a soft hand dissolve the firm grip that has guided our people to greatness. Be the man that you were destined to be, and rule in that fashion. Your loving grandfather and His Imperial Highness, Wilhelm I, by the grace of God, Deutsche Kaiser, King of Prussia, Margrave of Brandenburg, Burgrave of Nuremberg.
The tears wanted to
Count of
proceed forth from me, but I stopped them. I had been suspended at the midpoint of my grieving. Once this next debacle was finished, I could return to complete it. I placed the notes back into the dossier. No more sentiments. I appreciated these words. I still keep them in the cabinet in my office, under lock and key. Doña looked like she had been rubbing Spanish powdered chilies into her eyes. Such was the redness. A bit snotty as well, as indicated by the detritus in the kerchief I had given her. She looked at me with a mix of pride and fearfulness. She knew that father's and grandfather's words were heartfelt and true. I believed them to be heartfelt. I hoped that they would be proven true. Grief is a strange thing. It presents as a stone ball that is looped around the neck of the sufferer, a weight that takes time to remove and roll away. For many men, that stone ball is something that they take to their graves, rolling it up the hill of life, like the Greek Sisyphus, whose degenerate behaviors condemned him to an eternity of useless labor. For me, that stone ball was like the shot of a cannon that struck me squarely in the chest. From the hole that it created, that plethora of emotion that I had been trained to withhold now poured out. I took Doña, and we grieved physically. The rut of sorrow. It is a bizarre thing, how a loss can compel forward intimate desire. Perhaps it is the innate human instinct, predating those civilized notions that the best solution to a death is to act in furtherance in the creation of life. We would not know if we were successful for some time. As I write this, apparently we were. The train arrived without fanfare. I was unsure whether or not the papers had circulated the news, or it was simply too early in the morning for the citizenry to be active in the streets. In any case, there would be an ordered sequence to the events now set in motion. First, a call would need to be paid to the palace. to engage with the family and ensure that all preparations were in place to move forward with my coronation. Naturally following, a funeral procession, as tradition required, would be assembled and marched out of the city towards the family mausoleum in Potsdam. Whatever services that would follow had already been arranged, I am sure. I knew both of them to be far-sighted men. It would be uncharacteristic of them to not have planned for this eventuality. Finally, a period of national mourning would be announced, 2 weeks at least, for the news to be circulated to our own population, for the proper decorum to be observed by our diplomatic officers, and for the invitations to the following coronation to be sent to the extended family. Assembly of those invited and those compelled to attend would take place here, in Berlin, as would the ceremony. Then I would take that crown. I would take that throne. A Daimler met us at the platform. I was unsure who had dispatched it, likely mother, and it progressed at a greater speed than a traditional carriage. This speed would continue until the moment I would ascend a whirlwind of events as Donna and I took our seats. The driver gave a nod and sped off towards the palace. Donna had never been in such a craft before, given her anxious look and her vice-like grasp on my hand the whole way. I quite enjoyed it, this bit of racing. She released me when the fellow up front took up the brakes before the lawn. We dismounted and were greeted by mother and my sisters. Then the inexplicable happened. Mother opened her arms to embrace Donna. Years of fighting, years of screaming, years of tirades about one another, years of mother attempting to pull me away from her, years of Donia insisting that she be taken off to the invalid's home, years of madness dissolved away within the warm confines of a single hug. Some relief then. We proceeded inside. The baggage which we had departed with was already in situ. Perhaps the driver of the Daimler decided to take a detour for his own enjoyment. Whatever the case, the doorman insisted that I should proceed to my office and meet with the men already there. Which men? The Chancellor, I would assume, naturally. But what others? I was relieved when I entered. Moltke, Tirpitz, our Chancellor, of course. Diesel, Devereaux, strangely. The 5 of them had been sitting about the place as though they had nothing to say to one another when my entrance revivified them. To my surprise, each in turn offered an embrace and their condolences, as was proper. I sat at my desk, and the strange cast of characters that surrounded me gave me cause for thought. 3 of these men suffered with me as I descended into the earth. One approved my commission to command and coordinated the effort of my rescue. The last, the foreigner, ensured our safe passage through foreign territory and guided the men of 5th Corps to their eventual destination. I felt as though I owed each of them a debt of some kind. Each played their part to ensure that I would not be swamped with a duty of individual approval of each and every facet of the complicated dance that would soon take me. Moltke, brusque as ever, laid out the plans for the funeral's grand procession and had already paid a call to the commanders of our guard regiments to depart their barracks and entrain for the journey to the capital. He constructed the immaculate route for the parade, which units would stand where, which commanders would be placed in which rank, what banners and pennants would be borne, and the timing of the march from the avenue in front of the palace, down to the Potsdam Gardens, where the final burial places were already constructed. Tirpitz, in his own fashion, had arranged for the appropriate contingents from our navy to join the army formations. It was his pride and his insistence that they be allowed to be present during the procession. I wouldn't let a grievance prevent him from participating. Thankfully, he also had managed to coordinate the dignitaries that would be present and had his secretaries commission the construction of new equestrian monuments on the Hamburg Riviera. That wasn't necessarily a term in the testamentary documents of father and grandfather, but I let him go ahead nonetheless. Bismarck, never failing to see a political opportunity, and despite his advanced age, rounded up all of the politicians and foreign diplomats that expressed a desire to attend both the commitment of my father and grandfather to the earth and my own coronation. Further, he managed to secure the contingents of police that should be necessary, should socialist or other representatives of the ostracized classes begin some kind of demonstration in our path or during proceedings. Diesel proposed something rather unorthodox. While the traditional course demanded that our cavalry formations lead the column and form the closest formation to grandfather's casket, he had suggested that his walking engines act as pallbearers in a demonstration of the products of our advanced industry. I had to decline. I had seen the clumsiness of the things, and if they dropped their cargo, the newspapers would have a field day, or I would have to have Diesel hanged. Neither prospect endeared me. I permitted his invitation of notable scientific dignitaries and of his employer to both proceedings. Finally, Devereux. According to his own tale, he attempted to convince the French Assembly to lower their own flags on government property to half-mast out of respect. He was denied this, but I appreciated his efforts. He had corralled the contentious representatives of the settlements I had visited during my journey, and seemed to be willing to drag them to this mournful procession, kicking and screaming. The English were the least resistant, but his own countrymen had expressed a desire to remain in Paris and give condolences from afar. Perhaps the streets would need to be cleaned of their stench once this dreadful business was over. With our little cabal's duties reviewed and propositions approved, I left them to resolve whatever conundrums remained and moved to find the family. There would be a viewing this evening per our Lutheran tenets, and I needed to ensure that all other disquieting grief had been processed before we buried our emperor and crown prince. I almost felt more comfortable falling into a nest of vipers than to enter their presence. Our family had gathered in the parlor. Mother must have completed her grieving in short order. She and Doña ministered to my sisters, who had traveled far. Their husbands, royals in their own right, milled about aimlessly until I entered. They gave the same solemn greetings that my previous cadre did. Condolences, good fellow. I'm so sorry. If there's anything you need, simply call upon us. Blah, blah, blah. Largely meaningless, those promises. So often when tragedy strikes, the first men to offer aid are the last to provide it. I thanked them anyway. It seemed that the control over the emotional outbursts of the women of the family had been established. The viewing would take place within the hour at the old quarters Castle Cathedral. 2 birds with 1 stone seemed to be the aphorism most applicable. They would both be present at the same time, the same procession, the same liturgy said over their bodies. It would not have been my preference. They were distinct and different men. They should be commended to heaven in different and distinct fashions. My father's commitment to the liberalization of the empire was something that grandfather detested. Grandfather's commitment to the continuation of autocratic governance was his dying wish. I read as much in his final note. They never fought as Mother and Doña did, but too often, when I was a child, the tension in the dining hall could be cut with a blade, and we all knew the reason why. I sat in an armchair while the babbling continued. Eventually, one of the staff made their way inside, cautious to not disturb or interrupt the ongoing conversations. The announcement was made only to me, whispered from the leaning man. The carriages had arrived. I permitted the womenfolk and their husbands and accoutrements to proceed before me. One after another, the carriage formed a circle through the drive cut through the front lawn. Doña and I boarded last. As the driver closed the doors, she probed at me.
Do you feel ready, my love?
Not in the slightest.
Then you are ready.
No need to patronize me, my dear. I know enough. I have learned enough. But there is something missing.
You don't feel sufficient to the duty.
I'm sufficient for the duty. I may not be seen to be sufficient. She took my hand and bade me gaze into her eyes. Those white markings ran up her arms, and as I locked her azure eyes in mind, that dark hair, flowing over her high cheekbones and full pink lips, a contorted smile gave way to words.
Prince is ready to be king.
I blinked. Doña's hand was resting on my cheek. Doña's hand, not hers.
Perhaps we should have delayed all of this until we returned from our retreat. You don't look particularly well, William.
I felt a bead of sweat drip down from my forehead and onto my tunic. I felt around behind me for the shutter control on the carriage window. The need for air overwhelmed my desire to remain obscured from prying eyes. I took a deep breath while leaning my head on the carriage's window pillar. Lies were now becoming a necessity to maintain our little charade. I'm fine, just attempting to maneuver through it all. Arrival at the viewing was quiet. In the distance, the criers and the distributors of broadsheets now began to clutter the streets. Whomever was responsible for correspondence with the print media must have given the go-ahead. Crowds had begun to form on the connecting boulevards, kept at a respectful distance by the municipal authorities. There would be no morning mob, at least, not as of yet. Donia and I entered the cathedral. The lying in state of a sovereign is a bizarre practice. The practice originated as far back as the ancient Egyptians, whose pharaonic mausoleums still draw the eye and wonder of modern man. Here, we were not convinced that father and grandfather were gods, but there was still a reverence for the dead of the ruling caste that filled some deep instinct in the civilized soul. As far as I could tell, the morticians had done a decent job. It is morbid. It always is. They do their best to conceal the signs of prior illness or the damage caused by wounds that claim the lives of men, but those in attendance of the process always know what lies beneath the face coloring and floral scents. They were just men, old men, one far older than the other. First, father. The man who taught me to be like him, he who gave me an appreciation for art, he who taught me that man's conflicts are not the penultimate development of humankind. He who gave me my soul. Then, grandfather, the man who taught me to follow in his footsteps, he who had me a pride in my heritage, he who united our nation, he who gave me the strength to assume the throne that would inevitably become mine in a far distant future. He who gave me my mind. Sculptors apparently had already created marble likenesses, which now graced little tables in the cavernous interior here, and would eventually find their permanent place within the mausoleum. They are idealized, naturally. None of grandfather's warts were carved into the stone. None of father's thinning hair was chiseled into that high relief. Mother and my sisters began to break down. I took steps towards them, after kneeling before each casket for the appropriate length of time. Thankfully, someone must have taken note of my last interaction with a photographer, and there were no flashes or awful little hangers-on following us through the viewing. I gave each and every one of them an embrace, and they returned it. It seemed appropriate to give some kind of collective address to them, if nothing else, at least to quiet the sobbing. They are both with God now. They lived full lives. We will remember them just as they were in our lives, lively, joyful, supportive, disciplined. They will never be forgotten, by us or by our people. There wasn't an uproar of applause from them, of course, but one could see their confidence in my abilities to maintain order in father and grandfather's stead begin to rise. Better than nothing. I would have to come up with something better this evening. I wasn't afforded the time to formulate a proper eulogy. I grabbed one of the doormen, those white uniformed palace guards that looked like they were built on an assembly line, rather than being born as men. My instructions were to send out a request to my secretaries to begin drafting something. I knew that I would be called upon to speak later today. It might be a hatchet job, but my duties today would keep me too busy to write something myself. I don't mind wearing black. It seems to look best on our family. A dour color for a dour group of people. Finding the appropriate uniform did not take long. We spent nearly 2 hours at the cathedral before Moltke's biological automatons. In the guard battalions could be heard, marching in lockstep down the street. Thankfully, the citizens who had begun to congregate around the boulevard dissipated in short order on sight on the approaching column. He had brought with him all that he had described. Every regiment of the lifeguards were represented. Moltke himself, riding on a black stallion. He dismounted, and out of the demands of dignity, would walk behind the funeral carriage with the rest of us. Tirpitz and the Chancellor followed shortly thereafter. Bismarck extended his greatest apologies, but his reliance on his cane would be a liability and might impede the planned progress of the procession per Moltke's timetable, and requested that he be granted leave to move ahead of us. and rejoin us at the antique temple. I approved his request. A similar question was posed as to the elder Moltke, who, while proud to see his nephew show the appropriate deference to royalty, also insisted that his age made it impossible for him to proceed alongside us. Off they went. No debacle required resolving. The procession itself moved towards Potsdam without impediment. The people of the city, now roused by the shrieking of the newsboys, poured into the streets and, kept at a safe distance by the police barricades, mourned alongside us. The family, myself and my cadre were positioned behind the hearses, in front of which was the 1st Guard Regiment of Foot. I hadn't noticed that there had been any obstructions, as there was never a call for a halt, but apparently a group of socialists decided to make some kind of inappropriate political demonstration in our path, seating themselves in the road and giving some kind of lament about how our nation should become some emasculated social democracy. Given the reputation of our more elite formation, one could not say that the socialists were not brave. The police were not able to remove them in time. There was more than one comment made that the agitators should prefer to be arrested by the municipal authorities rather than face the justice that our foremost regiment might mete out. Their pleadings fell on deaf ears, and they remained obstinate in the face of our column. About 20 of them were arrested. Those awful red sashes that they bore made good cover, when the procession's front rank broke apart and displaced them in quick order. In the words used to describe the interaction between our lads and the agitators by their onlooking lieutenant, those ne'er-do-wells got the shit kicked out of them. How colourful. Not a tremendous embarrassment, less violent than some anarchist throwing a bomb at us, but more violent than I would prefer. We made it to Potsdam with time to spare, and the column broke apart to permit the hearse's entry into the consecrated ground. As the cordons formed around the now open gate, I took in another cigarette. Donna went ahead with Mother and my sisters towards the site. Father would be first. The interment went smoothly. My childhood pastor, the minister of the Königsberg congregations, said the words. He wasn't a frail man, but time had gotten the better of him. He said the critical words, a beautiful passage or three, and I stood with Mother and Donya, clasping hands, and offering prayers to the Almighty to give cause for Father to enter heaven, as if he needed our help. Grandfather next. In both cases, it was obvious that there had been at least half a decade of work involved in the construction of the tombs. Carved marble, Ionic columns, gilt leaf edging on all the stonework, marvelous looking, likely paid out of the public treasury, but that was no crime. The people should be proud to support their sovereign, even when he has passed to God. There was something unique about the whole process, as if these things we did, these proud and honored men that we now laid to rest, was simply a prelude to something greater. I had no notion of the instructions that they had given before they passed. Perhaps an emphasis was placed on the efficiency and timeliness of the thing. That would be Father's style at least, and I suppose that the greater event would be my coronation. Apparently I was worthy of expeditious effort, even by those who now act beyond the grave. We repeated the process, this time with a hymn sung by the cathedral's choir, which had followed us to the burial site. I think I'll request Wagner when I go. That would make Donia happy. I know in my gut that she will outlive me. I hope she does. I love her too much to let her go before me. As before, the casket was lowered by those impressive pallbearers, and the marble lid of the sarcophagus slid over him. I hope they both find their rest. It would be some time before I found mine. The coronation was a bit of a mess. While the imperial administration attempted to handle the sudden and severe sequence of events that prompted the crown to fall onto my woeful head, I did my best to bear its weight, all the procession and pomp that Donna wanted. I wouldn't sink from this crowd like my instincts demanded. Time for a change. Lean into this new power. The bells, having been situated in the time of Luther and our own family's infancy, rang out clear over the din of the gaggle of onlookers. Before I dismounted the Daimler that I had driven myself, a telegram was handed to me from grandmother, whose preoccupations in London prevented her attendance. In her stead, a delegation of her best men from the services, who got along well with our own cadre of epauletted madmen. I resolved to ignore the photographers. I would pose for something dignified when I returned to the palace afterwards. If they desired candid shots, so be it. The flashes were not noticeable over my efforts at concentration that the next hour would require. The family had taken their rightful positions in the eaves along the cathedral walls. My restored arm now rested on my saber. I declined the traditional field marshal's guard for something more open, more reminiscent of the cadet blade I had disarmed that Saracen with. No one, outside of Moltke, and perhaps a few lucky observers now residing below in Wilhelmstadt, would know the significance of it. But I would. The chorales rang out from the stone walls of the cathedral, a parade of officials and military men, religious leaders, and foreign dignitaries. I could swear that as I approached the throne, I caught Cousin Nicky's eye and observed him quickly dousing out a cigarette onto the floor. A bit young for such a habit, but I wouldn't halt the coronation to chastise him. Taking the cues that I had been taking for the last 15 years, I approached the minister. It would be inappropriate to simply don the crown myself, despite my preference for more simple procedures. The red, gilded carpet that snaked its way from the entrance of the cathedral, down to the altar, and up again to the throne would be my path. I knelt and prepared. Pronouncements from ministers always rang a bit hollow with me. I knew who I was before I moved along the carpet. Apparently now, I was His Imperial Majesty Wilhelm II, by the grace of God, Deutscher Kaiser, King of Prussia. The minister lowered the crown upon my head. It sat correctly, thankfully. I reflected on the course of events that had brought me here before I went below, the struggles of life on the march, and the delicate matters of diplomacy were things I had only read about and observed. I hadn't been required to participate in them personally. My disappearance forced me to consider what was most precious to me: my family, my people, my love, both of my loves. Returning, the autodidactic process of surviving the rigors of the world beneath tempered me. I was known to be impulsive on occasion. I feel that I still am, but measured action and speech are what make a man. Not his outbursts, not his proclamations from a throne, where it had once been conceivable that I would die a death unmourned and undiscovered. Now I stood at the height of power. I relished it before I returned. I felt that this new burden of supreme authority would blot out the conniptions I was suffering as a result of my tenure in the depths. These sightings of my former lover were another symptom of my breaking mind. The nightmares I had suffered since traveling to Kiel with Tirpitz never stopped. I hear the call of the depths in my dreams, and even as I knelt and took my crown, there was a part of me that spoke in the back of my mind.
Return.
Descend.
Adventure.
Plunder. Discover.
Go down and take what should be yours.
These impulses remain with me, and every time I consider them, I look on Donia and the children and realize how close I came to losing them, losing my crown, losing everything. Perhaps when little William is grown, and if I am of sound mind and healthy body, I will return, but not yet. Not until my tenure as Emperor of Germany has come to an end. The worst of it comes when I realize that I have left men down there, in that dark and damp place, who likely feel the same things pulling away at their minds. They too have children, wives, lovers, families. They too will likely be compelled to make a decision, to let go and return, or to delve yet deeper. I felt the weight of it fully, not for the first time. As a child, I often wandered into the office that grandfather had in the family estates in Lower Baden and snuck a quick trying on of the thing. It was heavy, but not unbearable. a solid and stoic representation of the duty I owed to my people. I took it. I took that crown. I took my throne. I took my power. And I will not let go. As I sit writing this, in that same office I had always preferred, with the west-facing windows and the newly planted cherry trees just outside, such that the breeze carries the scent into my nostrils while I work, there is a final sentiment that I should convey to you. Nothing lasts forever. Persons least of all, but nations, institutions, principles and ideas all eventually pass into history. It is the way of things, both above and beneath the earth. What troubles me now, and what troubled me as soon as I returned from my debacle in the deep, was determining the difference between the truth and what I believe to be the truth. Ruling without knowing what is real and what is a figment of your imagination will prove difficult. I know now to rely on the eyes of others when I believe my judgment to be clouded. Whatever curse I incurred by journeying through the deeps is a persistent thing. Each and every day that I sit on this throne, I yearn to return there, to the adventure and the mystery. Each and every day I know better than to give in to that petty desire. The persistence of the phenomenon is maddening. Like a tick, now draining my lifeblood, I feel its call. I hear his voice on the wind and in my sleep, that thundering, cracking glacier taunting me even now. You must now understand, dear reader, the truth of the matter asserted in this text. Beside all that I had seen, there is but one conclusion to draw from my trials and travails beneath the earth. If you have read this far, perhaps you already know what I now believe to be true. It is difficult to let go of these wondrous worlds, but it is possible for those strong of mind and heart. There is a truth that is far worse. Those wondrous worlds will never let go of you. Call them off. Give the signal for a redeployment.
Your Majesty, I have 35,000 trains in motion. Feldmarschall Schlieffen demanded the full commitment of the 1st, 2nd, 4th, 5th and 7th armies to this maneuver.
Moltke, I know that all of those trains have brakes. We have assurances that the British will intervene if we commit to this course. Send them east. The option is clear. Take the fight to the Russians and they will break apart against our defenses. Then plunge the dagger into their hearts. This need not be a two-front war.
If we do not proceed in the planned fashion, the French will attempt to batter down the fortifications in Saarbrücken, which are only 4 miles deep. If they break through, they will plunder the Rhineland with impunity. That cannot be allowed to happen.
Then block them with a portion of the reserve forces. Our full mobilization should be directed east, not west.
I will not risk plans 20 years in the making on your belief that the British are as well disposed as you believe them to be. What evidence does His Majesty have of their claim of neutrality? One telegram?
They will not commit. Their liberal majority in their parliament will not follow the autocratic Tsar into a war for some damn fool dispute in Nemesis. Their government will fall if their chief follows this course.
My Kaiser, do not believe the words of their ministers. They fall and rise to power in weeks. If we are not through with the conflict in the east, who is to say that they will not be waiting in Lorraine with divisions ready to support the French? Even that is the least of our concerns. If they close the North Sea to our shipping, our people will begin to starve within 2 years. We will strike now, while the iron is white with heat.
Whatever is pouring out of the Tunguska crater is eating the Tsardom alive. They've surrounded it with 2 full army groups. Whatever is left in the Baltics, White Russia, and the Ukraine will be bowled over by a swift advance. This is an order. Turn the formation around.
Your Majesty, it can...
Full faith and credit for the inspiration and narrative and the composition of this novel goes to the fellows at TG's EADSTD General Thread. Without the streams of creativity that could provide this author with substantial material, such a project would have never been possible, let alone completed. Presented initially as something of a joke, the development of this setting provides for an unparalleled opportunity to channel the creative spirit into something worthwhile and unique. While the scrutiny that necessarily follows contributions made anonymously often brought difficulties in furthering the goals towards the completion of this project, and more than one series of threads was brought crashing down by the uninitiated and those who lack the critical skills of reading comprehension, our project yet survives even past the current debacle of the shutdown. I should have updated this. After nearly 2 years in the making, it does fill the heart with joy to know that my contributions have been made with such quality and have been received with such a warm acceptance that so little of my material, which now numbers past 500 pages with the completion of this novel, required trimming and revision. With this great work now complete, I will respond to calls to assist in the formulation of my other contributions, being that of the Austro-Hungarian material that was presented some time ago. But I will now largely step out of the light for others to take up the duty of moving this project forward. I do hope to see it completed, however long or whatever form it may take. I remain open to suggestions as to the German and Austrian content and to the setting in general as the game continues along its path of development. As with all things, revision will be necessary to bring the contributions in line with that which has come before, and that which will come afterwards. The completion of this project, should it ever be completed, would be a resounding testament to the collective ingenuity that has been present in the threads from the very first day. It is without reserve that I present this contribution as a gift to the fellows who have helped shape this setting, which, while immensely interesting in and of itself, also forms the backbone of a unique game system, which has provided me with hours of enjoyment. The audio drama adaptation of this work, as you read this, will either be in progress or completed. Should you find yourself with sufficient time to parse through this ponderous tome, head over to the links on the newly created wiki to listen to it in that fashion. It has been a pleasure working with all of you, and I hope that all goes well moving forward. Your humble servant, Kaiser Anon.